Katie, what can you tell us?
Well, Alex, I would say it's been a risk-on week in what has been a really risk-off month. So like you said, the sector funds, if you look at what has been happening in the ETFs, they've seen $11 billion in outflows. That is the worst month on record. Just consumer staples and healthcare are still holding on to inflows, but you don't often see that sort of breadth when it comes to the sector ETFs. They're often used by traders, people looking for long-term exposure. That kind of movement is really not something you see too often. But I mean, if you look at just this week, it has really been risk on. If you look at the top 5 ETFs in terms of inflows, the top 3 of those have been S&P 500 tracking funds. SPY, of course, that's the biggest ETF out there. It's on top with about $4 billion. So just in the last couple weeks, really, of May, you've really seen dip buyers come back into this market.
And what does that tell us about the overall sentiment then? Tie this ETF picture, Katie, that looks quite complex, into what we're seeing more broadly.
It's interesting. So you have seen sort of this impulse come back into really the S&P 500 tracking ETFs, that sort of broad-based exposure. But what's caught my eye just in the past couple of days is what's been happening in HYG. That is BlackRock's high-yield ETF, and it was on track for a 5th straight month of declines. But just in the past 2 days, it has ripped higher. It's actually now positive for the month of May. If you compare that to SPY, again, that big S&P 500 tracking ETF, SPY is still down over 1% this month. So to see junk bonds actually outperforming the broader equity market, again, not something you see too often, could speak to a broader risk revival happening across asset classes right now.
Well, where do the commodity ETFs fit into this that you've noticed?
You know, you haven't seen too much. I mean, GLD, that's the one that comes to mind. It hasn't seen much love in terms of flows. And what's caught my eye, this isn't quite a commodity, but sort of counts. If you look at the ProShares Bitcoin strategy
Depends
ETF,
who you ask, I guess.
Depends who you ask. If you, for this purpose of this conversation, if you consider that a commodity, you're actually seeing short sellers really come at this ETF in particular. I was just looking at short interest. It's near a record high, which makes sense when you think about what has been happening in the crypto space more broadly.